If there are no questions on any of the assignments so far, we're going to go on and look at the last part of Chapter 10, our chapter on circles. Now, what we did yesterday is we talked about equations of circles. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be continuing on with equations of circles, but this time we're not given the center or the radius. We're actually given the two endpoints of the diameter. We're given the two endpoints of the diameter, and we're going to find the center and radius from it here. Chromebooks closed. Thank you. So what we do know is that the diameter is a chord that goes through the center of the circle and is twice the radius. So it's going to work out that the center of the circle is going to be in the exact center of the diameter. So what we can do to find the center is use our equation for the midpoint, which is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2, which is our equation for the midpoint. So the midpoint formula will be our formula that we can use to find the center of the circle. Now to find the radius, what we can do is just like we did yesterday, we're going to use the distance formula plus it would be minus to find the radius. But since we're using two endpoints of the diameter, we'll actually have to divide the number that we get by 2. Because when we use the distance formula for the two endpoints of the diameter, we're not actually getting the radius, we're getting the length of the diameter, which is twice the radius. And then once we have these here, we're going to go on and graph it. So for the most part for this here, we're not so much doing anything totally revolutionary. We're just using these two formulas, plugging our numbers in, and finding our points. Any questions on this here before we start the first one? So we can find the center first. And we can find that by plugging it into our midpoint equation. So we're going to take the x values of the two endpoints of the diameter, which is -1 and 5. So we'll have -1 plus 5 divided by 2 for the x value of the midpoint. And for the y value of the midpoint, we'll have 1 plus -7 divided by 2. Any questions on this so far? Now at this point here, we can plug this in. So we can do -1 plus 5. And -1 plus 5 is 4. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. And we can plug that into a calculator. We can hit the fraction key and say -1 plus 5 over 2. Hit enter, and it'll tell us that it is 2. We can do the same thing for our y value, doing 1 plus -7 divided by 2. And we'll see that it is -3. Because 1 plus -7 or 1 minus 7 is -6. And -6 divided by 2 is -3. So we get the point to -3. And this here is our center. And we could graph that point to -3. And we can create a point. Because that point there is the center. And the radius is going to be any point going from the center of the circle to a point on the circle. Any questions over anything we've done thus far? Okay. So I'm going to write it down here. Center is to -3. Okay. Now we can find the distance, or essentially we're going to go about finding the radius. So to do that, we can use the distance formula. So our x values for our 2 points are -1 and 5. So we can have -1 minus 5. -1 minus 5 squared plus our 2 y values are 1 and -7. So we can say -1 minus 7 squared. And again, at this point here, the calculator will do all this for us. We can type the square root, parentheses, -1 minus 5, close parentheses, squared, plus, parentheses, 1 minus -7, close parentheses, squared, and hit enter, and it'll tell us the answer. It'll give us the entire answer for us. Now, if we did this by hand, 1 minus 5 is going to be -6 squared. 1 minus -7 is going to be 8 squared. Well, -6 squared is 36. 8 squared is 64. And 36 plus 64 is 100. And the square root of 100 is 10. So the distance from endpoint to endpoint is 10. So the diameter of this here would be 10. And our radius exactly would be is 5, because the diameter is twice the radius. So if we're to use that to graph, well, we can take our point and go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can go to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can go to the left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can make our circle here if we're wanting to graph it, because the radius is a distance of 5. Now, if we drew this exactly right, well, -1, 1 is a point on this circle, and 5, -7 should show up as well, as long as we're able to draw this as exactly a circle. Yes? Okay. David's in the office. And then we have this here. So any questions on any of this here so far? Now, if we wanted to actually write the equation of the circle, it wouldn't be too bad, especially since we have the center of the circle. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. So we'd say x minus 2 squared plus y minus -3 squared is equal to 5 squared. And if we simplified it like we did yesterday, we would get this equation here, because our negative and a negative would make a positive. So we would get y plus 3, and 5 squared is 25. Any questions on anything we've done thus far? All right. There are no questions on this here. Let's look at the next one. The endpoints of a diameter of a circle are 6, -8, and 4, -4/16. Find the center and the radius of the circle, then graph it. So if we want to find the center, we're just using the midpoint. And the midpoint formula is really we're adding the two x values together, dividing by 2, we're adding the two y values together and dividing by 2. So our two x values that we have are 6 and -4. Our two y values are -8 and 16. So at this point here, we could plug this into the calculator to get our answer. Or if we did this by hand, well, 6 plus -4 is 2 over 2. -8 plus 16 is going to be 8 over 2, which gives us 1, 4 as our center. Since I have the center, we can go on and graph it. So when I come over to the graph, I would go over 1 and up 4 and make a point for the center of the circle. Any questions on this here? Now to find our radius, we're going to use the distance formula. It's going to be the square root of our x values subtracted from each other. So we can have 6 minus -4 squared plus our y values would be 16 minus -8 squared. And again, at this point here, we can plug all this into the calculator and it would tell us our answer. We don't have to do this by hand. But if for some reason we wanted to do it by hand, 6 minus -4 would be 10 squared plus 16 minus -8 would be 24 squared. Now 10 squared is 100. And 24 squared, I do not know off the top of my head. 576. If we add these two together, we would get the square root of 676, which is 26. Yes? Works out to be exactly 26. So the diameter of the circle is 26. The radius would be what? 13, because we would divide 26 by 2 and get 13. Well, that's unfortunate. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It'll be out here somewhere. And the same is going to be true for everything else, because this circle is going to be way too big for the graph, unfortunately. Any questions on any of this here so far? Are we good with this here? Yes? All right. We'll look at one more and then we will be done for today, because I feel like y'all are picking this up. Y'all understand how this works. And for the most part, this is just plugging numbers into an equation, or really two equations, to solve for this here. Now the first equation we can use to find the center of the circle is our midpoint. So for the midpoint, we would add the two x values together and divide it by 2. And then we can add the two y values together and divide it by 2. Well, 5 plus 3 is 8 divided by 2. 1 plus -1 is 0 divided by 2. Well, 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 0 divided by 2 is 0. So our center is at the point 4, 0. Any questions on this so far? Now, on all the ones previously, we used the distance formula from the two endpoints to find the diameter, which we can use to find the radius, yes? Well, what is, by definition, a radius? It is the distance from where to where? Right, the center to the part on the circle, to a point on the circle, yes? Do I have the center of the circle? I do, don't I? And do I have a point on the circle? Well, yes. So for our distance formula, the two x values that I can use the center value of 4 minus and 0 minus for this here as well. Because if I use the center to one of the 2 points, Eric, which one do we want to use? 5, 1 or 3, negative 1? Let's do 5, 1. So I can plug that in, 5, 1, and now I'm not getting the diameter's distance, I'm getting the radius. Because the radius is the distance from the center to a point on the circle, and since I have the center, we can actually find the radius. And at this point, we can type this in. Well, 4 minus 5 is going to be negative 1 squared. 0 minus 1 is negative 1 squared. Well, negative 1 squared is 1, 1, which is the square root of 2. Now, if we found the diameter, if we actually plugged in the diameter, and I think some of y'all did already, you found that the diameter is 2 square root of 2, which if we divide by 2 is just the square root of 2. And someone go on and approximate that to, let's say, 2 decimal places. So I think it's 1.41, and it just continues on indefinitely. And the reason I have it in this form here is because, well, we can't actually draw the exact distance of the square root of 2. It doesn't work as well. But if we were to do it, 1.4 would be somewhere at about here, 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 and here. Or make sure I'm going that exact distance. 3, yep, and 5, 1. It'll look something like this here. Now, it is hard to get the exact points. Now, if you noticed, I redrew it the second time and put 2 points down, yes? Well, how in the heck did I get those 2 points? Because what were we told? 2 points on the circle were what? 5, 1, and 3, negative 1, yes? So at 5, 1, this point and 3, negative 1, these 2 points here are points on the circle. I can kind of use them to get the graph. And especially if on Big Ideas Math, if we did this on Big Ideas Math, really, once we found the center of the circle, I could extend one side to one of those points and actually have it. And especially on the ACT, if they're giving you a problem like this here, find the equation of the circle given these points. These 2 endpoints are on the circle. We'll figure out which circle actually has those as points on the circle, because that'll be closer to what we're actually looking for. But that is all we are doing